Hello, I'm Mia. I am the front-bound host for our system, and I'm going to be talking about how I discovered we were a system. So, first, I'm going to talk about things that happened long before I discovered we were a system, but were obviously signs that it existed that I didn't notice at the time. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what we dubbed the double memory problem, which is when we'd end up with two separate conflicting memories from the same event. The most obvious one from this is we used to tell it as a story of the one time we fell asleep sitting up with our eyes open, which was not something we ever did, and for some reason we didn't think that was weird at all. Which I had a memory of it where I was very obviously dissociated and not present for the memory at all. And then I felt like I nodded off and woke up, and then suddenly I was there again. But I also, after that, had a full memory of being fully present, which confused me for the longest time until I realized that someone else had actually been present and I was just remembering what they had remembered. Another thing we noticed that was definitely because we were a system was that we noticed that anytime that we played kids games like tag or hide and seek, that our speech and mannerisms were completely changing, which we noticed was happening but just shrugged it off as, well, we're playing kids games, so obviously we're being more childlike. Then when we got to our early teenage years, we started noticing that we were sometimes walking differently, which was around the time that Angela formed, which our mom definitely noticed too, because her response to us being diagnosed with scoliosis was to mention that she'd noticed we'd been walking like a model recently. Around that same time, we were also really into Sandersides, which is not the sign that we were a system from this point. The sign we were a system was, at the time, we took a bunch of which side are you quizzes, because we took a lot of quizzes like that at the time, pretty much obsessively. And we got 50% Virgil and 50% Roman. And our brain's response to that was, oh, so that's why the voices in my head are constantly arguing over absolutely nothing, which we obviously thought it was normal that we had voices in our head at the time that were getting into petty arguments over stupid day-to-day stuff, which were sometimes escalating into literally wars internally. We'd also noticed that we never really got angry, and then it would all of a sudden come out all at once, and then suddenly we'd get the ability to curse, which at the time could literally cause us panic attacks, which was obviously signs that Veronica was fronting. So there were two alters I'd interacted with since I was a child that I didn't really recognize were alters. The first was Cynthia, who I used to play with in the inner world to escape reality, for lack of a better way of saying that, which had been talked about when we took general psychology as something that some DID systems experience, and we just didn't connect the dots at the time. And I kind of compartmentalized her as an inner child, because that was the concept that made the most sense as far as what she was, that I knew about at the time. And then and the other was the demon who first showed up in my nightmares as a kid, which then went on to be how I envisioned our sleep paralysis demon whenever I deal with sleep paralysis, and then became what I ended up talking about as our self-deprecating voice in our head that was constantly putting us down. And then I discovered two other alters at the beginning of discovering we were a system, those being Claire and Veronica, which at the time I thought of as alter egos. They were the main two that were always fighting in my head, with Claire having the more optimistic view and Veronica the more pessimistic view on things, which we discovered them around the end of 2019 when we had the opportunity to study abroad and were in a new environment, with new people that we were allowed to more be ourselves around. Then at the beginning of 2020, we ended up dating someone who has dissociative identity disorder. They didn't really talk much about their experiences, but they ended up being part of why we discovered we were a system, because in the summer of 2020, we were already really into watching a bunch of psychology content, and then we got a bunch of DID content recommended to us that we started diving into and learning more about and relating to with a lot of the experiences we noticed we've been having, which initially we didn't accept we could be a system because all we were seeing was DID, and at the time we 100% thought that we didn't have amnesia, so we weren't relating to that aspect, and we're like, it has to be something completely different, which then we ended up looking into OSDD, which we related to more, but we still had our reservations about it because of having a front-bound host. Then in fall of 2020, the combination of school stress and the identity struggles we were having at the time around what was going on in our brain ended up culminating in our host at the time splitting into me and an anxiety holder. And I held a lot of the identity crisis problems. I ended up having a significant amount of gray out amnesia for my entire life at the time, which came back in pieces for some things. It's definitely closer to what it was before the split than it was around the time of the split, but it's still not back to normal, which still I was struggling to accept what was going on because I hadn't seen anyone with a front-bound host, which I was struggling to accept that I could be experiencing it when I wasn't seeing anyone else who was experiencing it. Then around the fall of 2021, I ended up discovering another system who had a front-bound host, and watching a lot of their content, which resonated a lot with me, and I slowly started to accept it more. I still wasn't fully accepting of it. It took until the fall of 2022 when Cynthia ended up joining a Discord server without permission, which ended up being good for us. But I was suddenly in a Discord server that I didn't remember deciding to join, and ended up talking to more people with similar experiences, which ended up being when I finally came to accept that I was a system, which of course we still struggle with denial, because of course that's free with the disorder, which at the time I think we only knew of maybe 24 alters and thought we were a very small OSDD system. A few months ago we started compartmentalizing where amnesia had shown up in our lives and where we had denied its existence and why we had denied its existence. And we have for maybe 2 years at this point been discovering subsystems and side systems and fragments, and slowly discovering that we were polyfragmented over time, which there's probably still more to discover, but that's the overview of how I discovered we were a system. So I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about us. If you liked the video, please leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, please feel free to subscribe and check out the other content on our channel. If you have any questions or want to learn more about our system, please feel free to leave questions and suggestions in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. I hope you're having a great day, and see you in the next one.